Hey, welcome to Russ Twitter Garage, and welcome back to the 55 POS Buick build. Junk clothes are on, and we're in the garage. Let's get something done. All right, so finally, I think today will be the day. I have been just busy doing a million other things, some car-related, some not. But I think it's finally time to put something in the engine bay. All right, so the plan is to get this engine installed today if I can. So first thing I have to do is put the Turbo 400 transmission onto this LS-based engine. Since I'm using a Turbo 400, which is designed to work with small block Chevy and big block Chevy and pre-LS design, the earlier engines have a longer crank. I think it's 0.400 difference. So to put an old school, I should say old school, yeah right, stuff I've been using forever, right? Old school style transmission onto one of these LS engines. There's a couple ways to do it. I know it's been covered a million times. One way is to use the LS dished flex plate, and they make a small pilot adapter that sticks into the crank and sticks out a little bit and makes up the difference to catch the snout on the torque converter. The other way to do it is with a 4L80E flex plate and spacer, and obviously I have this here. This is the way I'm going to do this. The reason I am doing it this way, even if it could cost you more than a $15 spacer, is that for some reason, if you've been following along in any of the forums anywhere, there seems to be a rash of thrust bearing failures on these engines when people put Turbo 400s behind them. And it can't be the transmission. I'm sorry, the things have been used forever. What I believe is that those cheap adapters that slide into the crank and then are supposed to slide over to the snout on the converter are not giving enough clearance. And then what happens is, instead of things moving when this flex plate flexes, things bind up and put pressure on the crank of the engine and wipe out the thrust bearing. So I'm going to fall on my default and say, what did the factory do? Well, the factory used this when they used a 4L80E, and a 4L80E is an old school, quote, transmission like the Turbo 400. They didn't use a little spacer, they used this. So this is what I'm going to use, the 4L80 flex plate with the spacer. That'll make up the difference. And then also what I did in order to do this was, before anything happened, I flipped up my converter and fit my converter into the flex plate and made sure that it could turn and there was clearance and it wasn't going to stick or bind up, because I want that to be able to move. Now I know they're bolted together, so it's not going to turn independently of the flex plate, but when the flex plate flexes, the converter should be able to move whatever thousandths of an inch and not bind up in this spacer. The other thing I checked was the holes for mounting the torque converter to the flex plate, to see if I had to elongate these holes, which I think has to be done with the dished flex plate, but it's not necessary with this one. Everything lines up perfectly. And this torque converter is not a factory converter. It is a $50 B&M converter that I got at a swap meet. It's labeled 1800 to 2000 stall. You know, snout looks okay. Fluid in it is red. Fingers crossed that it'll actually work. But it's a low buck build, and that's the way it's going. So first thing I have to do is install the flex plate. So this flex plate, I think I bought this one at a swap meet. Of course, because of this spacer, they use longer bolts than the dished flex plate. So you will have to purchase these, and they are pricey. So if you can get one of these at a scrapyard or something and take it off an engine, save the bolts. I got 5 out of the 6 came with it. I bought one from Summit, and yeah. So let's put it on. All right, so since there is no pilot hole or anything on this to line up with the crank, I doubt it matters where it goes, but I do see a witness mark on here where it was on the original engine. So I'm gonna, there's a circle stain there. I'm gonna line that up with the dowel hole in the crank and install it like that. Okay. And something interesting I just saw here today, I didn't even know. There's two threaded holes here in this spacer. So if you were removing one of these from an engine, to make it easy, all you have to do is take the bolt out and thread it into one of these holes here. Hit it on either side, it'll work like a jack bolt and push it right off of the engine. So if it was wedged on there tight, it would come right off. That's pretty cool. Wish I'd known that quite a while ago, because I actually took one of these off a 6.0 that was in a van once, and I could not get the flex plate off. And if I had known that, would have had it off in 5 minutes. All right, so I got my bolts. Got my Loctite. Blue I'm using. That'll seal the threads, as well as make sure these don't fall out. It's been a hectic couple days trying to find time to work on this car. Partially my own problem, my own fault. I bought another car last week, 47 Cadillac, if you saw the shorts on that. I've had quite a few early Cadillacs, and I really like them. They're so cool. At least I think they are. And that factory Loctite is much tighter to get on. So I've been playing with the Caddy a little bit because it was sitting since 09, 08 really. And I wanted to get it started, and I got it running, which is cool. Those old flathead V8s are pretty amazing. They run super smooth, and they actually used them in tanks in World War II. Had two of them in each tank. Pretty cool. 346 V8 flatheads. All right, bolts are snugged up. I'll get them torqued. All right, torque spec is 74 foot-pounds. I'm going to do it in a few iterations. We'll go 25 first. In the star pattern. I got a bar in the front balancer. We'll see if that holds it enough to wedge it. Then I'm going to go 50. And we'll go 40. Let's go 40. 40. Okay, now let's go 74. Yeah, I think I might have had it too tight. Whoop, my bar. That is tight. All right. All right, well, so much for putting this in the car yesterday, because today's another day. And I did a bunch of stuff off camera because we had a torrential rainstorm come through, and I have a metal roof. And when it's raining that hard, it sounds like a train going by. And it's still raining. And at least right now, it's lighter rain, but you may still be able to hear it on the roof. What I did yesterday before I called it quits, took the transmission, obviously. This is my Turbo 400 I'm going to use. This transmission has been sitting in a building for 20 years, at least. It used to work. I hope it still works. It had some red fluid in it, so we're just going to put it in and see. It's an unknown. I replaced the seal for the torque converter on it, put on my $50 torque converter, and when you put the converter on these 400s, they have to click in like 3 times to make sure they're seated into the pump. And then while I'm bolting up the transmission, I reach underneath and make sure the converter is still spinning as I get closer to bolting it up, because if you don't have the converter seated completely, you will destroy the pump. So it's bolted up now. One other thing I did was I actually drilled and tapped this hole on the transmission. That bolt is just threaded into the transmission case because on LS you don't use that bolt hole. So that way I had a mount for my dipstick tube, and I just welded that dipstick tube I had laying around off, I think it was a Turbo 350. I made a quick tab to mount it, and it's bolted up. And I had bought a kit to put it's actually not just tapped, there's actually a helicoil in this case that threads into. And I needed that drill bit anyway because I had to drill out all of the case holes to fit the metric bolts. They were obviously originally for 3/8 bolts to go to the old school engines, and the holes weren't big enough for the metric bolts, so I had to drill those out a little bit anyway. So I think we're ready to go. Transmission's bolted up. Got my helicoil in, got my dipstick tube in, and I think we're about there. Let's get a little bend to it. Yeah. So now I'm going to fly this in. Oh, that was the other thing I did. I bolted my motor mounts on that I'm using. This side has the plate I made to space the mount back. You saw that in the motor mount build video. All right, so I think I can finally try to put this in here. See what happens. All right, here goes nothing. Hopefully this goes smoothly, but you just never know. I think I'll put it on time lapse. That way you won't hear the rain. It's raining harder, so it's getting louder, but little wiggling, and the engine's in there, the bolts are in. It's crooked right now. It's actually sitting against the firewall because I got to get the car in the air and put the transmission cross member in. If anybody was interested in the helicoil kit to put the bolt in the trans there for the dipstick tube, this was what I got. Just an M10 by 1.5 kit. It has the helicoils and the drill bit and everything you need to do it. Takes 5 minutes, no big deal at all. All right, so let me make a little room in here and get this thing in the air and get the transmission cross member in. All right. Cross members back in for the transmission. Nothing really special about that. If you saw the video when I made it, bolted right back in like it's supposed to, so that's good. Oh, the pan worked out well. Lots of clearance around the steering rack, and the depth is good. It's just a little bit lower than the transmission. Not bad at all. And here's my converter spacing, looks good. That's supposed to be 3/16 to 1/4 of an inch. Any more than that, you got to add washers. That looks good. No problem there. My holes will line up like they're supposed to up there, so that's good. Got room for the tranny cooler lines, no problem, under the floor. Modulator connection there. Dipstick tube cleared fine. Looks good. So all their preliminary work when we made the mounts worked out well. That looks good. All right, so now I guess just continue with assembly. All right, drive shaft is back in. No drama there. Torque converter is bolted up. Blue Loctite on grade 8 bolts. I would not use Home Depot hardware to attach your converter. Here's a quick thing on bolts. Bolts are different grades. So when you grab them out of your coffee can, use good ones. The one there on the left that has no markings on the head, that's probably like a Home Depot bolt. That has no grade on it. The one on the far right has 3 lines. That should be grade 5, which is good, but the 6 lines there, that should be a grade 8. That's the strongest, and that's what I ended up using for the torque converter bolts. I don't think I would use the one on the left. Grade 5, I don't think there'd be a problem, but I had grade 8s, so I used them. Don't use Home Depot bolts. All right, one last thing I'll add to this video I just banged out was a ground cable from the block to the frame. Grounds are really important with a computer-controlled car, engine, transmission, and especially if you're going to use a trunk mount battery, which I plan on doing. Grounds are important. So I have a ground from the block to the frame here, and then on the other corner I actually have a ground here from the frame that runs up to the body. So the body is grounded to the frame, the engine is grounded to the frame, and then when I put the battery in the back, the battery will be grounded to the frame. I've seen threads or whatever where people say you need to run the ground from the battery all the way up to the block, but I've had no problem just running the battery right to the frame on the ground and using the frame as the ground path back up to the block. It's worked fine, charging works fine, and cranks over like the engine has the battery right up front, no problems. All right, so that will be the end of this video, and this car will continue to get worked on, but I'm going to introduce another project, and that would be the 51 Hudson. You see, the POS special here was originally supposed to be just a slap it together because I had nothing going on at the moment build, as in I don't even know if I really planned on fixing the floors, fixing the trunk. I have definitely spent a lot more time on this car than originally planned, and that always happens with me. It's gonna be an awesome, reliable driving car. I just didn't do it as I guess half-assed as I originally planned on. So this car still needs a few months more of work. And now that it's already April, I have a commitment to myself and to my daughter and my nephews that this Hudson will be on the road by Halloween, which is still some months off now. It's only April. I would like it done by October 1st. And while that seems pretty simple, you know how life goes. I can't spend every day of my life building cars. So this car is going to come down here and I will introduce the project and discuss what is going to be done to it. The reason I say Halloween is, of course, it's going to be the cliche copy of Doc Hudson from the movie Cars. Not an exact copy, but, you know, painted up and stickered because my daughter's a huge Cars fan. My nephews are a huge Cars fan. And I think it'd be really cool to get them out in it for Halloween. So that has to be on the priority list. And while working on that, I will continue to do updates on the Buick. It just may not be done as fast as originally planned because I got other priorities. And when it starts to become too much work to get done in too little time, you got to just relax and get it done and keep it fun. All right, so we'll see you on the next video and go over what the future plans are for this guy.